Welcome back to Transcriber from Reddit. Today's topic comes from the subreddit WomenInNews, posted by user MSMolly. The post is a linked post that's titled, "The Right's Obsession with Childless Women Isn't Just About Ideology. It's Essential to the Capitalist Machine." This has the gray tag, Politics. The article is an article from The Guardian, specifically under Opinions section. Before I begin reading the article, there's a couple things I want to mention. First, it's not just the political rights that are obsessed with childless women. Evangelical Christians and any kind of conservative religion, including Islam, are obsessed with childless women. Women choosing not to have children is foreign to them and can be very upsetting. Second, and I know the article will talk about this more, but people who are pro-capitalism and even those who are pro-socialism are in favor of women having children. Because women having children means that there's going to be more people, and more people means more support. However, while socialism sees more people as more support, capitalism sees more people as more buyers. Think of it like an MLM. I will go ahead and read the article. Again, the title to the article is "The Right's Obsession with Childless Women Isn't Just About Ideology. It's Essential to the Capitalist Machine." Written by Nazreen Malik. There's a subtitle that reads, "J.D. Vance's comments on Kamala Harris reflect a stubborn debate in supposedly progressive societies." This article was written on September 2nd, 2024 at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Below that is an image. We see two circles. The one on the left is a woman with a healthy boy child on the one side and a healthy girl child on the other. The circle on the right, which is smaller than the circle on the left, is of a woman standing alone, with nobody on either side of her. In front of that circle is a person painting a red no sign. Red circle with a slash running through it. The article reads as follows. A woman without biological children is running for high political office, and so naturally that quality will at some point be used against her. Kamala Harris has, in the short period since she emerged as the Democratic candidate for U.S. president, been scrutinized over her lack of children. The conservative lawyer Will Chamberlain posted on X, linked here, that Harris, quote, shouldn't be president, end quote. Apparently she doesn't have, quote, skin in the game, end quote. The Republican vice presidential candidate, J.D. Vance, called Harris and other Democrats, quote, a bunch of childless cat ladies miserable at their own lives, end quote, linked here. It's a particularly virulent tendency in the U.S., with a right-wing movement that is fixated on women's reproduction. But who can forget, parentheses, and if you have, I am happy to remind you of a low point that still sticks in my craw, end parentheses. Andrea Leadsom, during the 2016 Conservative Party leadership election, saying that Theresa May might have nieces and nephews, but, quote, I have children who are going to have children, ... who will be a part of what happens next, end quote. Quote, genuinely, end quote, she added, as if the message were not clear enough. Quote, I feel that being a mum means you have a real stake in the future of our country, a tangible stake, end quote. It's an argument about political capability that dresses up a visceral revulsion at the idea that a woman who does not have a child should be vested with any sort of credibility or status. In other comments, Vance said that, quote, so many of the leaders of the left, and I hate to be so personal about this, but they're people without kids trying to brainwash the minds of our children. That really disorients me and disturbs me, end quote. He appears so fixated on this that it is almost comical, a man whose obsession with childless women verges on a complex. But his, quote, disorientation and disturbance, end quote, is a political tendency that persists and endures. It constantly asks the question of women who don't have children in subtle and explicit ways, especially the higher they rise in the professional sphere. Quote, what's up with that? What's the deal? End quote. The public sphere becomes a space for answering that question. Women perform a sort of group plea to be left the hell alone in their painstaking examinations of how they arrived at the decision not to have kids, linked here, or why they in fact celebrate not having kids, linked here, or deliberations on ambivalence about having kids, linked here. Behind all this lies some classic old-school inability to conceive of women outside mothering. But one reason this traditionalism persists in ostensibly modern and progressive places is that women withdrawing from mothering in capitalist societies, with their poorly resourced public amenities and parental support, forces questions about our inequitable, unacknowledged economic arrangements. A woman who does not bear children is a woman who will never stay home and provide unremunerated care. She is less likely to be held in the domestic zone and extend her caregiving to elderly relatives or the children of others. She cannot be a resource that undergirds a male partner's career, frailties, time limitations, and social demands. Side note. I would also like to add that women who do not bear children often get derided and made fun of for not having children by older people. They are seen as simultaneously as less than, especially when it comes to deserving just basic respect, and they're also seen as people who need to be taking care of other people's children, or need to be volunteered to take care of other people's children. Or worse, to always be volunteered to take care of elderly relatives, with no lives or no attempt at helping them establish a life outside of that paradigm. And in an age where we have allowed, or it has been allowed by others who have more means and more power than us, that has been established that is lower paid work. And by lower paid, essentially, I mean poverty. So any woman who does that kind of considered low-skilled, low-paid labor, she is considered to be almost required to give that time up and give up her labor in order to do that. It is much easier, I will admit, to make a married woman, and especially a married mother, go through all of the caregiving and domestic duties. But even when you do not have children, there will still be family and society pressure on you to extend those same duties to those in your immediate circle. Despite whatever trauma you endured as a child, despite whatever hurt or harm you still need to overcome in your own personal lives, and at expense of whatever career you have, irregardless of if that career is the only reason that you have any sort of quality of life at the moment. And again, these same people who are pushing this on you also do not want maternity care or child care to be publicly funded whatsoever. There should be a greater public funding of this in order to release the burden off of mothers, especially considering how just living today requires both parents to work. Vouchers could be made available to private schools, especially if parents want to continue the tradition of sending their children to private schools, but can't afford it without the opportunity of a state voucher otherwise. But no, because we must be taxed until death and money drown out of us constantly, we are told we should never consider that as an option, even though that is the greatest thing that a community can do, regardless if you're childless or otherwise. I continue reading. A mother is an option, a floating worker, the joker in the pack. Not mothering creates a hole for that, quote, free, end quote, service, which societies increasingly arranged around nuclear families and poorly subsidized rights depend on. The lack of parental leave, childcare, and elderly care would become profoundly visible, quote, disorienting and disturbing, end quote, if that service were removed. Below that is a clip inserted where below the clip reads, Oprah Winfrey takes a swipe at J.D. Vance during surprise Democratic convention speech video. I'm not going to play it here. To me, Oprah Winfrey and whatever sayings or otherwise she might have on this mean much less, considering that she allowed physical and sexual abuse to take place to children at schools she created that are over in Africa. I continue reading. Quote, motherhood, end quote, writes the author Helen Sharman in her new book, Mother State, quote, is a political state. Nurture, care, the creation of human life, all immediate associations with mothering have more to do with power, status, and the distribution of resources than we like to admit. Between the words resources and than, there's a couple dots signifying that this is an abbreviated section from the book. I continue on. For raising children is the foundational work of society, and, from gestation onward, it is unequally shared. End quote. Side note. While I do not agree with everything she says, she makes an important point here. Raising children is the foundational work of society, for without children, societies cannot continue and cannot have a hope of a future, at least an ongoing future. Now, it is a good question, and it should be raised, more than just this article here, of whether having children in a capitalistic society means that that is a future worth having, especially considering what today's children are facing if we do not put in some established boundaries. I continue reading. Motherhood, in other words, becomes an economic input, a public good, something that is talked about as if the women themselves were not in the room. Data on declining birth rates draws comment from Elon Musk, parentheses, quote, extremely concerning, end quote, end parentheses, linked here. Not having children is reduced to entirely personal motivations, selfishness, beguilement with the false promise of freedom, lack of values and foresight, irresponsibility, rather than external conditions of the need for affordable childcare, support networks, flexible working arrangements, and the risk of financial oblivion that motherhood frequently brings, therefore creating bondage to partners. To put it mildly, these are material considerations to be taken into account upon entering a state from which there is no return, Assuming motherhood happens without such context, Charman tells me, is a, quote, useful fantasy, end quote. It is a binary public discourse, obscuring the often thin veil between biological and social actualization. Women who don't have children do not exist in a state of blissful detachment from their bodies and their relationship with maternity. A number have had pregnancies, miscarriages, abortions, and periods. A number have linked here. A number have entered liminal stages of motherhood that don't conform to the single definition from which they are excluded. A number extend mothering to various children in their lives. Some, like Harris herself, have stepchildren, parentheses, who don't count, just as May's nieces and nephews didn't, end parentheses. A number have become mothers, just not in a way that initiates them into a blissful cub. They experience regret, depression, and navigate unsettlement that does not conform to the image of uncomplicated validation of your purpose in life. Side note, for anyone who wants to become a parent, I recommend that you go to the subreddit Regretful Parents. Children need to be a hell yes. If they're not a hell yes, then they are a hell no. And that sub will show you the realities of living with and having children. But the privilege of those truths cannot be bestowed on creatures whose rejection of the maternal bond has become a rejection of a wider, unspoken, colossally unfair contract. Women with children are handed social acceptance for their vital investment in, quote, the future, end quote, in exchange for unrewarded, unsupported labor that props up and stabilizes the economic and social status quo, all while still suffering sneeriness about the value of their work in comparison with the serious graft of the men who win the bread. On top of that, women have to navigate all that motherhood, or not, entails all the deeply personal, bewildering, isolating, and unacknowledged realities of both, while being subject to relentless, suffocating, infantilizing, and violating public theories and notions that trespass on their private spaces. With that comes a sense of self-doubt and shame in making the wrong decision, or not being as content with those decisions as they are expected to be. It is a constant, prodding vivisection. That, more than anything clinical observers feel, is the truly disorienting and disturbing experience. There's a subnote under here that reads, Nesreen Malik is a Guardian columnist. Here's my ending thoughts. As a society, it needs to be acknowledged how much work children are, how much work teaching children is, how much work raising children and helping children become productive future members of society is. It's work. It is hard work. It's mental work. It's physical work. And a lot of it is work you don't just bounce back from because of how much you have invested yourself. Whether it's the pregnant woman who's experienced complications, whether it's the mother who adopted a daughter, whether it's the auntie who is working with her nieces and nephews as she watches their family from afar, trying to do her best to help them navigate the turmoil that their family is experiencing. Whether it is the single dad, whether it is the teacher that is working at the school that is not being paid what they're worth. Because society doesn't value children or the work in raising them. That is a good reason to not have children. More than that, people who do not have children, who choose not to have children, should not be excoriated for doing so. Support should still be offered, especially for those who consider themselves Christians. because in supporting one another and loving one another unconditionally is what Jesus would have us do. And there is nothing more important than that. And ultimately, all the sacrifices that our women, that our mothers, that our grandmothers, and those that have come before us have made, they should be honored and respected. Not ignoring the mistakes and the missteps and the things that they did wrong in the past, but acknowledging and trying to do better in the future. Thank you for watching and listening, and I will see you in the next one.
Break the hard chains of fate, roads we walk, we create, for our futures are wide and vast. To respect and respond, to add strength to our bond, cast the fury into the past. I can choose